Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm starting my January wrap-up. I'd actually filmed another intro, but changed some things around, and so wanted to try again. So first things first, I wanted to mention that I did actually complete TBR Knockout and Buzzwordathon for the month, and I'm not going to give you my thoughts here because you're going to hear them in just a minute anyway, but for TBR Knockout, the two prompts were to read a book that you meant to read last year or that you started last year and didn't finish, and I read Docile by Cam Sparrow for that. And then the other prompt was to start a series, and I read A Marvelous Light by Freya Marska, which is the first book in the Last Binding series, and the second book comes out later this year, so I'm very excited about that. Then for Buzzwordathon, I did not end up reading She Who Became the Sun, but I did read When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo. I really enjoyed this book. You'll hear more of my thoughts in a moment, but it was a really good like short book to kind of slip in between all of the longer things that I was reading. The other thing I want to mention before we dive further into my thoughts on these books is that for my buying limit, if you haven't seen my channel before, I'm keeping a jar of marbles that, like, for each one of my owned books I've read, I get a marble. I also get a marble if I finish both of my challenge books for the month. I'm not finishing both of my challenge books for January. It's the 29th. I am still reading, and I anticipate, if all goes to plan, which it may not, if all goes to plan, I will have finished A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas, which was my, That's a Thick-Ass Boy, damn, read a book over 750 pages. That was the book for that. And then my other challenge book was Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper Case Closed, which I have not gotten to and will not be getting to because it's probably going to take all of the rest of January for me to finish A Court of Silver Flames. But I did add one additional rule I wanted to mention here, which partway through the month I realized that one of my goals for the year is to read the last month's Illuma Crate each month, and I wanted to incentivize myself to do that, so I've actually added an additional rule where I can get one extra marble if I read the previous month's Illuma Crate. So I actually did that because this was the December Illuma Crate. So I just want to mention that because otherwise the marble count is going to be all over the place. But I think that is everything I needed to mention. That's all the housekeeping stuff, and let's see what I thought of those books now. So the first one I have is A Marvelous Light by Freya Marska. This one is a fantasy romance set in Edwardian London following Robin, who, due to a paperwork error, becomes the sole liaison to the magical world, despite not knowing that magic exists. And then Edwin, who is his magical counterpart, the guy he's supposed to work with within the magical world. A lot of the marketing for this book has talked about how it is a curse-breaking adventure, like magic adventure story, and I really don't think it's doing it any justice because this book is first and foremost a romance. It is very much a case study, or not a case study, a character study of Edwin and Robin, and looks at the way that their relationship develops over the course of the book. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening here because there's a lot of like external societal pressures that they have to deal with that I thought were really interesting. This is set in the Edwardian era. It's set 9 years after the Oscar Wilde trials. So they're dealing with like the societal pressures around the fact that they are gay men in Edwardian London. That means that they have to be careful with who they trust and who knows about them. And then there's also some internal pressures on both sides. Robin, because he's got some family obligations that he's trying to figure out how to deal with. And he's also like suddenly thrown into this world of magic that he didn't know existed. So he's trying to like sort through how he fits into this world now. Edwin is kind of a loner. He's very much like a bookish type, and he's never really been close to anyone and has kind of got to sort through whether or not he feels like he can get close to Robin. So there's a lot of interesting pressures acting on their relationship that I just thought were really well done. I think the characters are all really well written. Edwin and Robin, you get a lot of their kind of thought processes and emotions, and they're just really nuanced and interesting characters. But the side characters are also really well written and complex. There's several of them that I would happily read an entire book about, and luckily we are getting actually 3 of these. So this is the beginning of a trilogy, and the next book is going to follow Robin's sister Maud as she is trying to solve a mystery on a boat. And also I believe Maud gets a girlfriend. And then the other book that I finished is Docile by Cam Sparrow. This was a hell of a tone shift after A Marvelous Light, because that's like a really sweet romance, and this is a really difficult book about like capitalism, and kind of a central question is, can people consent to things if they don't have kind of the resources and the ability to not consent? When their only option is to do the thing, can they really be considered consenting to that thing? So that's kind of a central question here, and it's following Elisha, who takes on his family's debt in a kind of nearish future America, where there are these next of kin laws that mean if you die, your debt is passed on to your direct descendants. So he takes on both of his parents' debt and goes to sell himself into what is essentially indentured servitude, I don't know why I said that so weird, as a docile. And then the person who buys his contract is this guy named Alexander Bishop III, who is the current CEO of the company that creates docile, which is a drug that dociles are allowed to take that basically ensures that they don't remember anything about their time as a docile. They take it during the duration of their contracts, and then when they leave and were returned to their families, they no longer remember any of what happened to them. You can see how this might lead to some abuses of the system. Anyway, Elisha refuses docile. This is not a spoiler. This is, in the first few pages, we know that he's going to do this. It's also in the synopsis. But Elisha refuses to take docile because his mother was a docile for 10 years and then came back and the drug didn't wear off. And so she still behaves like a docile 4 years later. And so Elisha is planning to refuse docile, and then his contract is bought by the guy that makes it. And so it's about the tensions between them and the way that their relationship develops as they have to navigate the situation where there's a lot of like societal pressure and particularly familial pressure on Alex to basically prove that he's in control of his docile, and then also Elisha trying to maintain who he is as he goes through this experience. So this is a very difficult book. There is a lot of graphic sexual content, largely dubious consent or rape in this book. There's also suicidal ideation and attempted suicide, so I definitely would say if you are bothered by those things, do not read this book. It does not pull any punches. Like, I don't know that I could recommend this book to anybody, because I think it's very much a book you have to choose to read for yourself because the content is so dark and difficult. However, I do think that this is a very successful book in what it's trying to accomplish. I think that the questions it examines are interesting, and the ways it examines them are also interesting. I'm also really impressed with how unsettling K.M. Sparrow made this book. There's sections of this that, like, they just completely freaked me out, and they're just like really mundane things happening, but there's just the way he utilizes perspective in this book is really fantastically done, because there were so many bits that were really unsettling and creepy. So I highly recommend this book if it sounds interesting to you and it's not going to cause you mental or emotional harm to read it, but otherwise I would say maybe steer clear of this one, even though I think it is well done. Hey y'all, I finished my third book of the month today, and it was A Master of Gin by Peeta Jelly Clark. I really enjoyed this book. It was just very fun, very fast-paced. I found myself absolutely tearing through it when I was reading. And I just love all of the characters in this world like so much, because you get Agent Fatma, who is the protagonist, who is in one of the early short stories, but you also get some of the other recurring characters from early short stories. So I do think it's worth reading the short stories and novella first. Just want to put that out there. But you get all of these fun recurring characters and then some fun new characters that I also really enjoyed. Hadia was fantastic. She's such a badass and just a wonderful character. So there's so many fun characters, and then the world with the like steampunk setting, and Fatma being a member of the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and Supernatural Entities. Like, it's just so much fun with all the magic and steampunk elements. So I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed being back in the Dead Djinn universe with a full-length novel. I thought that was just wonderful. I did have a couple of complaints about this, mostly to do with it feeling like there really weren't, the stakes were high, but there wasn't danger for the main characters. And then also there were some bits where like these characters are super smart, intelligent people, they've been through a lot, and somehow they're missing things that are very obviously right in front of their faces, and I found that a little bit frustrating and not very believable. But other than that, I loved this book, and I'm not going to go into too much more detail here because I do have a video coming out hopefully soon with further thoughts, which I will link down below and in the cards above whenever that does come out. So if you want to hear more about my thoughts on A Master of Gin, check that out when it comes out. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. A great third book of the month. This one I got from the library though, so I don't get a marble towards my buying limit thing, and my battery's flat. So today I finished The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, which I picked up kind of on a whim from the library. They had the audiobook available immediately, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia has a retelling of The Island of Dr. Moreau coming out later this fall, I think, maybe, or summer. It's called The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. So I really wanted to read the original story in preparation for that. And I gotta say, it was extremely underwhelming. It was pretty disappointing, actually. It was only a 4-hour audiobook, so that's pretty much the only reason I finished it. It's, for the most part, extremely boring. Very little happens in the book. A lot of the interesting stuff is kind of explained via monologue by Dr. Moreau. Most of it is interesting things happening off page. Narrator comes in, is told the thing by somebody else, and then like recounts that information to the reader. And I just don't really enjoy that story structure because it just is like, just instead of telling me about the thing, show me the thing. Let me see the thing happening. So there was a lot of that. And then there was also just like a lot of casual racism and misogyny in the story that I really didn't care for. So I ended up giving this one 2 stars, and I really don't plan to read anything else from H.G. Wells. That was just really disappointing, and I'm not really that interested in picking anything else up by him. Remember to film the vlog clip from Blood and Ash, but forgot to actually film the wrap-up clip. So we're doing that now. I finished From Blood and Ash a few days ago, and I have really mixed feelings about this one. I think that the plot is fun. It's very predictable. I predicted a lot of the reveals that happened, but once you get into the plot, the book is pretty solidly paced. It's enjoyable read for like the middle 300 or 400 pages. The issues I had were kind of at the beginning and at the end of the book for the most part. The beginning is very front-loaded with information that doesn't become relevant for a long time, so the story doesn't actually start until almost 100 pages into the book. And then at the ending, suddenly the pace changes drastically and it becomes extremely fast-paced, but a lot of it is like Poppy flip-flopping on how she feels about Hawk for the last 150 pages. And also I really didn't like the ending of this. I think it could have cut off like a paragraph before it did with one reveal, but it does 2 reveals instead, and I think that the second reveal doesn't make sense with everything else that is happening in the story, especially given the kind of politics that we know of the area that they're in. So I just don't think that it made a lot of sense, and I think that it paints Hawk as being quite sinister in a way that he has not been set up to be elsewhere. I do think it's an interesting choice, and I think it's cool to like make the love interest seem like maybe he's not the greatest person, and like it's interesting as a choice for a romance, but like I'm just not sure how this is going to work going into the next book. And I think that it really should have cut off like a paragraph earlier, and then this reveal could have been at the beginning of the next book with a little additional context that would give more information about why it's happening, because it just didn't make any sense. That's kind of my main feelings about From Blood and Ash, and I'm not going to go on too long about this because I do have a vlog coming up at some point where I'm reading the entire series, so I don't want to like repeat myself too much. But keep an eye out for that. I'm hoping it'll be coming out soon-ish, but I'm currently waiting on a library hold for the second book, so we'll see. Before I forget to film the clip, I actually finished my 6th book of the month today, which is very exciting. So today I finished When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo. I actually started it during lunch today and then finished it this evening. I really enjoyed the Singing Hills cycle books. They're very short. They're like 120 to 130-ish pages a piece. This was the second one. There was a third one coming out later this year. And I just really enjoy the structure of them. They're like stories about storytelling, and each one is following the cleric Chi as they go on these adventures to basically gather stories and gather histories. And in this one, Chi did not have their companion, the bird Almost Brilliant. Almost Brilliant was not present in this one, but there were some other characters that were traveling with Chi instead who I also really liked. And this one follows Chi and their companions as they are traveling up this mountain pass, and they end up surrounded by hungry tigers. And in order to survive long enough to be rescued, Chi has to tell the story of the scholar and her tiger lover. And the structure of this one was really interesting. So the previous book had been done like as vignettes, like little bits of story that happened along this timeline to like different pieces along a long span of time. This one is structured as Chi telling the story, and as the story goes along, every once in a while the tigers interrupt to correct Chi and tell them their version of the story. And I just thought that was a really interesting structure. I really enjoyed it. I thought the tigers were very they're very interesting because there's more than one of them, and they all have like different personalities, which I thought was fun, and there was a really interesting dynamic between the tigers. But also I really enjoyed the story that she was telling, and it was interesting to see like the ways that the human version of the story differed from the tiger version of the story. So I just thought it was really well done, and it's definitely a book I'd like to come back to in future, because it feels like the kind of book that I would get more out of it upon a reread. Now knowing what happens in the story and knowing the story that she is telling, I think I would get more out of it as I go along. So I really enjoyed this one. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first installment in the series, because I think that one had a greater emotional impact on me, whereas the story that was told in this one didn't have the same kind of like emotional gut punch that the first book had. But the structure here I think is, for one thing, a little bit easier to follow. I do remember hearing some criticisms of the first book being kind of difficult to follow. I think that this book is easier to follow, and I do think that the structure with like Chi telling one version of the story and the tigers correcting with a different version was just really interesting. So I'm really excited for the third book to come out later this year, and I'm glad that I managed to get to this one before that one comes out. This is just my filming angle now. We're just gonna roll with it. It's convenient because it's on my desk. Anyway, I finished A Desolation Called Peace a few days ago, and I absolutely love this book. It's a new favorite. It's cemented this series, It Takes Colon Duology, as a favorite series for me. I love both books in it, but this one in particular I don't want to talk too much about, because I do talk about it in a reading vlog that will, I think, go up a few days before this wrap-up does. So I'll link that in the description and in the cards if I can. But I think this one is brilliant. It's poetically written. There's a lot of interesting questions in it around like personhood and identity, and like who gets perceived as people and why, and who gets to make those decisions, and what are the repercussions of those decisions, what are the inequities that are created when somebody decides that this is what personhood is. So that's one element of this. And then kind of the central driving question of this book is, can these two cultural groups that come from such extremely different backgrounds and have such extremely different beliefs around personhood, can they meet and not have violence result in that? Because both of them are having their kind of worldviews destabilized. So can they encounter each other and not have violence as a result? Is violence necessarily the result of these extremely different cultures meeting? So I think that that is really a fascinating central question here. This book is very character driven. It is very much focused on like, it's like it's large scale and a small scale, because it's large scale in terms of like first contact for this empire with an alien race that they've never encountered before. But also it's small scale because it's about the ramifications of what's happening, of these events on the lives of just a handful of characters. The four perspective characters in here are Mahit, who is the protagonist in the first book, and then also 3 Seagrass, 9 Hibiscus, and 8 Antidote, as well as some of the people around them. So there's a lot of stuff around that. There's some really great friendships in this book. I just love it overall, and I, again, will link my reading vlog where I talk about this for the Goodreads choice stuff. I'll link that in the description below or in the cards above, wherever I can figure out how to put it. And yeah, check it out if you'd like to. I highly, highly recommend this book, in particular this whole series, because this is a sequel. But I think that this is a really well-written sci-fi, and I am very much looking forward to reading anything and everything that Arkady Martine puts out in future, because I think her writing is fantastic. Well, it is officially the 31st of January. It's 7:32 in the evening. I'm not going to be finishing anything else this evening. I need to do some editing and set up my bullet journal for next month. But I'm really happy with my reading this month, even though I didn't finish Akasif. I think I probably made a note at the beginning that that plan fell through. But I ultimately managed to read 7 books, somewhere around 2,500 pages, which is more than any month of last year, and my highest page count for any month since I started tracking, I think. Except maybe December 2020, but I wasn't tracking page count at the time. So I'm really happy with that, and my final marble count for the month is 17. I had 12 prior to the beginning of the month, and I gained 4 for reading books that I already owned, plus an additional marble for reading last month's Loom Great. So I've almost got enough marbles for 2 books, which is very exciting. So I should be able to hit that 20 marble point in February, probably pretty early on, and I may try and pre-order a couple of things. I'm waiting for some stuff to be available for pre-order at my local indie bookstore, so that really works out well for me, and I'm really pleased this month. I had a couple of ups and downs because I really didn't like the Island of Dr. Moreau all that much, and I was kind of mixed feelings about From Blood and Ash, but everything else I really liked, and I am currently really enjoying Akasif. I'm like 300 pages in, 350 pages in, so I'm making progress. It's good. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you'll consider giving it a like and maybe even subscribing to see what happens next. I'm currently posting videos every Saturday, so there is more content coming soon, and thanks again for watching. Bye.